Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar, Building Strong Brand Protection Programs and Emerging Risks. My name's Amy, and I'm a member of the marketing team at Perry Johnson Registrar's Food Safety, Inc. I'll be facilitating today's webinar and offering technical support to our speakers. Today, we're very excited to be hosting Gary Van Breda of the McDonald's Corporation as our guest for this presentation, and I'll be introducing him to you all a little later on. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. To ensure audio quality, all attendees are on mute. However, we do absolutely want to take any questions you might have. So to ask a question, just go ahead and type it into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel and click send. We'll answer as many of these as we have time for at the end of the presentation. You don't have to wait until the end to send your questions in. So as you think of them, go ahead and fire those over to us and we will hopefully be able to respond to all of them. The most frequent questions we usually get have to do with the availability of slides or recording. And the answer to those questions is yes, we do offer the recording of the presentation with voiceover and the slides as a downloadable PDF. The slides will be available from the PJRFSI website, and the recording will be posted to our YouTube channel for you to review, or maybe you want to send it to someone who couldn't attend the presentation live. So just really quickly, this is what the control panel might look like on your screen. You're going to click that questions tab, the little triangle, to open it up, type that question right in and fire it away. All right, before I introduce our first speaker, I do have a quick polling question just to help us get an idea of who all is in the audience today. And that first polling question, is your organization currently certified to a GFSI standard? Just choose whatever response suits you best. We're looking for hopefully to get some good participation from the audience today, and this will just help us tailor the presentation to who is in attendance. So for those of you who might have joined us a few minutes late, welcome to the webinar. We will be taking questions via the control panel, so go ahead and drop those in as you think of them. We've got about 50% participation on this poll, so let's get a few more votes in and I'll move right along with the slides. All right, fantastic. Thank you all so much. And this is how the voting went. It is all anonymous, so feel free on the rest of our polling questions to answer however you feel. No one's going to know how you voted. And it looks like the majority of people are certified, so that's always great to see. Now I'm going to roll right along to our first speaker. Our first speaker today is Paul Demarin. He is the Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Supply Chain here at PJRFSI. He joined us back in January of this year and has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. Before he came to PJRFSI, Paul worked for 15 years in the certification industry with clients in every sector from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul also worked for many years in management system certification, and before that, Paul was a professional chef and a consultant for over 20 years in major hotel chains, restaurants, private golf courses, and food service organizations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Paul. And Paul, you can take it away when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you everyone for joining today. Welcome. I hope you're having a good day. As Amy mentioned, my name is Paul and I oversee our food safety and supply chain division here. I'm going to refer to us as FSI today just to try and speed that up. But there's a lot that we're going to be discussing today, and I'm extremely thrilled to welcome our friend Gary Van Breda from McDonald's to discuss brand protection and vulnerability. So in advance, thank you very much, Gary, for attending and agreeing to do this for us. So let's jump right in. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about PJR and our family of companies. We were founded in 1994. We have been expanding overseas for the last 25 years. We achieved ANAB accreditation shortly after our creation, or PJR's creation, in 1995. And during that time, we had also attained our UCAS accreditation. In 2005, one of our companies called PJNA was founded, and that's our healthcare technology company, and specializes in telemedicine, transcription, medical coding, etc. PJR, as I mentioned, was founded in 1995. PJLA, which is our laboratory accreditation business, was also founded in 1999. And then in 2012 is when PJRFSI was founded as a result of the demand in the industry for third-party certification to many food safety and quality standards. We're headquartered in Troy, Michigan, but we are a global company, so we work with our customers all across the globe in the registration, testing, and certification space. We have a wide range of programs in our food portfolio, and that includes everything from HACCP to GFSI, organic to gluten-free, cannabis, hemp, social responsibility, and even government audits that I'll talk about in just a moment. So, when you take a look at the last 8 years, we really have worked with companies across every sector within the industry. We work with companies in production, processing, distribution, supply chain, retailers, processors, farms, importers, and exporters, and even distribution companies. And our main goal is to work with them to help manage food safety risk and ensure quality and brand protection requirements are also considered. We really believe here that, we want to add a value-added certification to our clients. We want to be able to pick up the phone when our clients call, and we want to be able to help them understand that there is a difference between our organization and other organizations that are out there as well. Really, our main goal is to uphold, the standards of professionalism, technical competence, and integrity throughout the life cycle of the audit process. Currently, we have about 460 auditors in over 60 countries, and our auditors, we're quite proud of them because they understand, certainly not only all the rules and regulations of the countries, but equally important, the language and the culture of those, of those countries. So moving on, we have our services that are defined really into four main, areas of our business. We have auditing and certification to third-party standards such as SQF, FSSC, BRC, Global Gap, to name just a few, or all of the ISO family of standards as well. We do second-party assessments, which are standards that we've written and developed, such as our GMPs for manufacturing, GDP for distribution, HACCP, our cannabis and hemp standards originally. So we do a lot of that. That's where our clients will use those standards to help minimize the risk within their supply chain. We do a lot of customer specific work as well. So this would be maybe audit standards that you have in place and that you want to implement across your supply chain. So we can work with you to help conduct assessments globally for that. We do a lot of training for organizations to all of the standards that we currently support today as well. So just moving on then, as I mentioned, we have about 30 programs currently that we support today. There's many types of audits that are still in the industry today, accredited, unaccredited, some are government regulated, some are retailer mandated, some are client specific, some are not. And again, because of that, we categorize our offerings into 5 real key areas: first, second, and third party that I just finished discussing. But we work with various organizations around the world to conduct additional assessment requirements that your customers may have on you. And then we do a lot of work with the government as well. So for FSMA audits, FSVP for the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, VQIP for the Voluntary Qualified Program as well. So we have quite a large coverage of offerings for customers, and we certainly look forward to supporting you if you have that need as well. Now, just to talk a little bit about accreditation, I believe that this is important because we have long-standing relationships with all of the organizations that are on the slide here now. And what that means is it shows that we're recognized around the world with different accreditation bodies and scheme owners. It helps to give our customers assurance that the family of companies here, we operate under the rules of accreditation and scheme owners, and that helps to regulate us and maintain the highest quality of our work. On many occasions, like we're doing today, we've partnered with scheme owners, but also key industry customers to ensure that information we have is most up to date and that we're passing it along to you. We want you to look at us as a knowledge leader in the space, and we want to provide this information to you in a timely fashion and as it comes up. So if you look at it this way, where we as a certification body come and audit you, the accreditations bodies and scheme owners typically come and audit us. It's generally a very large investment made by really every certification body that has these types of accreditations. But at the end of the day, it's worth it because it gives our customers confidence that they're working and are partnered with an industry recognized and respected partner. And that is really it for me. Just to kind of wrap it up here, I want to again thank you everybody for your time today. It's really, you know, we're still in a time of great change. It was only 8 or 9 months ago that this all happened. I think that we're in many ways still at the very beginning, and I think that we need to continue executing your plans that you have in place for post-COVID-19. And that could still be new pivots to our business models, our operations, supplier policies, and certainly technologies and remobilizing and continuing to mobilize your workforce. This is certainly a time of great change, and I think as long as we continue to lay out the plans that we had in place, you're going to be able to demonstrate to not only your customers and suppliers, but your stakeholders and employees that we are in control. So thank you very much for your time. Amy, I'll now pass it back over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. And before we move along, I do have another polling question for everyone, so let me go ahead and launch that. And again, this is anonymous. It's just to get an idea of who all is on the call and to help us tailor the presentation to who's here. The question here is, what are the minimum requirements you have on your suppliers for quality, safety, or supply chain? Options include, we require all suppliers to have a third-party audit. Maybe you purchase from a broker or distributor who manages that. Maybe your customers dictate what they'd like. So just choose whichever response is most accurate to you, and we'll get some participation and move right along into introducing Gary Van Breda. For those of you who might have come in late, let me check and see if we've got any questions here. All right, it looks like someone was having issues with the audio. I do apologize. That may be a connectivity issue on your end. Again, the webinar is being recorded, so if you are having audio difficulties, that should be clearer on the recording. So if you're having issues listening in now, I do apologize, but please do feel free to check out the recording. It should have better audio if it's a connectivity issue. We're sitting around 50% participation, so go ahead and get those votes in on this poll and we can move right along. All right, thank you all so much for participating in that poll. This is how everyone voted. And it looks like a pretty even split between requiring a third-party audit or a GFSI or GRMA benchmarked audit scheme. So very interesting to see. All right. And move right along to our feature presentation. Our second speaker of the day is Gary Van Breda. Gary is the Director of Global Food Safety for Foods and Packaging at the McDonald's Corporation. He's been there for the past 3 years. In his current role, he works closely with regulators, academia, and the food industry to ensure that McDonald's food safety programs are reputable, valid, and science-based. He is an advisory board member of the University of Georgia's Center for Food Safety and was a board member at the University of Nebraska's Food Allergy Research and Resource Center. Gary's academic background includes a BS in biochemistry, microbiology from the University of Cape Town, and a BS and MS in food science from Kansas State University. He has 30 years of experience in the food industry, working for many of the major McDonald's suppliers. And before he came to McDonald's, he had leadership roles in quality and food safety management systems for major food manufacturing companies such as Tate & Lyle, Cargill, and the Coca-Cola bottling system. So Gary, thank you again so much for taking the time to join us. We're so excited to have you, and you can go ahead and take it away whenever you are ready.
Okay, thank you so much, Amy, and thank you, Paul, as well. Hello, everybody, and so glad to be here. I hope that you and your families are safe and well. And thank you, FSI, for this opportunity to speak about building strong brand protection programs and assessing emerging risk to protect the business. Let me see if this will work. There we go. So before we get started, it's important to understand the value of brand McDonald's. If you do a quick scan of the internet, you quickly get to see that McDonald's is one of the 20 most valuable brands in the world in both brand recognition as well as market capitalization. So many of you may be familiar with the sign on the left, but actually there are so many components to this brand. So what we're actually saying is not that we are just selling billions of burgers, but the purpose is actually about serving the community, serving customers, crew, farmers, franchisees, and suppliers. As we look to the future, we believe that the impact that we will have a greater focus on aspects such as food quality and sourcing, and I'd put food safety in there as well, our planet, community connections, and job inclusion and empowerment. So at McDonald's, we proudly serve great tasting, high quality, safe food and beverages to 69 million customers every day across more than 100 countries and 37,000 restaurants. And actually, that's about 122 different countries that we serve our products in. Now, that's a huge responsibility for us. And McDonald's, as well as our supply partners, it's really no secret that we say that our success really rests squarely on the shoulders of many, all the way from farm to the counter of the restaurant. And our ability to serve safe food is really dependent on the commitment of an entire food chain, knowing and understanding their responsibilities to produce safe food every day. So when it comes to protecting the brand, it's really about having skin in the game, as we say here at McDonald's. Recognizing the fact that food safety is one of two critical enterprise risks. We say that food safety is not negotiable. It's one of the few non-negotiables that we have within the company. In fact, it is cheaper and easier to maintain high food safety standards than it would be to repair the brand if there's any damage or if the brand was subjected to any type of reputational risk. Anytime there's a recall, by the way, in the industry or a withdrawal in the industry, it has a negative financial and reputational consequence for all of us within food service and within the food retail space. And therefore, it is really important for us to protect this brand. And the way in which we do it is we focus on the following food strategies. The first strategy that we tend to, and these are strategies that I'm going to highlight today. There are a few more than this, but these are the key components of what we would manage within our food safety strategy to ensure that we provide the access to safe food every day. The first is science-based food safety standards requirements, expectations that we manage every day. Also, elevating food safety culture. And then the third component of our food safety strategy is really anticipating and responding to emerging food safety risk. So let me talk a little bit about our food safety strategy. And this will hopefully give you a little bit of insight into, the way in which we go about protecting this brand, which is so important for us. So for us, like many of the key players within the food industry, food safety is not a competitive advantage. We know and we do share information freely within our supplier base, also within our competitor base, and also across the industry with regulators and academia. So our vision is simply to provide safe food, to build customer trust, and achieve food safety excellence across our industry. And the key word here is trust. And we certainly do not take this responsibility lightly. We also understand that our position and scale means that we can use our leadership to raise the standard of food safety along this entire food chain. Our mission supporting our vision is to source and serve safe food and beverages every day to every customer in every restaurant. We have three strategic priorities that support our mission. Firstly, ensuring that we have the right organizational structure with the correct expertise in place. This includes that we have the correct access to microbiologists, epidemiologists, medical experts, toxicologists, engineers, just to name a few. We understand that our responsibility in public health and the environment And so having systems in place to continually improve our processes, procedures, and protocols are very important to us. And then finally, we also have goals and performance measures that are globally aligned. And the reason for this should be fairly clear. It is important because of the fast pace of the internet. You know, an incident that happens halfway across the world soon is escalated to a crisis at home. And the way in which we bring this all together is really by these 5 actions that you should see in front of you. Firstly, by identifying and mitigating risk that is identified through intelligence, embedding food safety into every decision that we make. Thirdly, ensure that we have the correct science-based standards for food and packaging in place. Fourthly, integrating food safety into the design and development of food and packaging, but also the design of equipment and the design of our restaurants. And then lastly, the actions that we focus in on is leveraging third-party verifications, including our third-party audits. So just to further clarify what our operating principles and accelerators are, we were a customer-driven organization. So being customer obsessed is really vitally important in making food safety decisions, and putting the customer and the consumer, and I would even argue the public in general, at the forefront of every decision that we make is vital to ensuring that food safety becomes embedded within the organization. We also recognize that we are better together. We have the power of leveraging all aspects of our network, including our suppliers, our corporate structures, as well as our franchisees who are responsible for serving food every day. And then the last operating principle is about commitment to lead. You know, if you're the top 10 of the top 20 valuable brands in the world, you really have no choice but to lead within this food safety space. All this is enabled through better communication and training, the use of digital technology, and specifically the use of big data, artificial intelligence, as well as machine learning, which is something I'll speak a little bit about later on as well. And then finally, also verification and measurement of success. Okay, so let's look at the way in which we ensure science-based food safety requirements within our supply chain. So what you see in front of you is really just a depiction of, you know, how we manage food safety all the way from the farm to the counter of the restaurant. We set food safety expectations and requirements along this entire continuum. At the farm, we have the McDonald's global or good agricultural practices, where we define the way in which we expect food safety risk to be mitigated in the field at the farm. At our direct supplier, we have our supplier quality management system, or SQMS requirements. And this is a bit of a misnomer in that it covers both food safety and quality, even though it simply says quality in the heading. However, this document, we define all the expectations that we have for our suppliers to manufacture safe and consistent quality food products. One step down, we also define at our distribution centers, so these are the distribution centers that actually feed the restaurants. We define strict requirements for storage and handling of food that are destined for every restaurant that we operate within the world. At the restaurant, we also have food safety training and requirements for the safe handling of food. All of our internal requirements that you see in front of you that we manage across the food chain meets and exceeds the requirements defined by the Global Food Safety Initiative, or GFSI certification program owners. On a regular basis, and typically this happens on about a yearly basis, we evaluate our standards against the benchmark GFSI requirements. And it is assessed that McDonald's requirements are equivalent to the GFSI scheme requirements plus addendum requirements that address the specific McDonald's requirements. And typically this means that during a GFSI audit, a supplier, for example, can also complete the addendum audit to be fully in compliant with the McDonald's requirements. So if we specifically look at the farm and specifically at the McDonald's Good Agricultural Practices, you can see that we manage all foundational aspects such as land usage, irrigation, water management, the appropriate use of fertilizers, and personal hygiene aspects of food production in the field. So a good example of this is when we look at, for example, the irrigation water management. We're very clear about being in compliance with the LGMA water metric standards within the United States. And those are similar standards that we would have embedded within this document that we would replicate to other farm applications around the world. So in addition to this, we also assess compliance to risk mitigations, such as foreign material prevention, as well as the risk associated with prior land use, etc. And then finally, we assess the management system component of the system, such as management commitment and traceability, food safety programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy for a polling question number 3.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Gary. We do have a pair of polling questions really quick that I'd like to throw out for you all. And that first one is, you can choose as many of these as apply that you feel. So just choose as many as you'd like. And that question is, what do you do in your business today to identify emerging food safety risks? So go ahead and select as many as you'd like or as few. Just to anyone who might have joined us late, we are taking your questions. You can go ahead and type those questions into the questions tab of the control panel on your screen, and we will respond to as many of those as possible after the conclusion of these prepared slides. So let's get some more participation in on this poll, and I can get on to the second polling question we've got for you here, and then Gary can wrap up his presentation. All right, fantastic. Thank you all for your responses there. Again, these polls are completely anonymous, so no problem sharing your true thoughts. That's how you all voted, so thank you for your participation there. Moving right along to our second polling question in this little set. It's a simple yes or no question, and that question is, have you conducted a food safety culture survey and have you integrated the findings into your business planning process? Yes or no? So go ahead and choose whichever applies best to you. We'll get some participation going and then we'll move right back to Gary. All right, thank you all so much for your participation in our polls today. And it looks like it's actually a 1 to 2/3 split there, which is interesting to see. All right, Gary, I'm going to hand it back to you and you can go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Can you still hear me okay?
Yep, you're live.
Okay, very good. So what I just described prior to the poll was the way in which we manage our farm applications across the globe. Now, our farm applications addresses aspects of raw agricultural commodities related to agricultural products such as produce. What I'll describe as well prior to getting into the supplier component of the way in which we manage our direct suppliers is we also have very similar requirements and applications, which I'm not going to go into any depth today around the way in which proteins are manufactured. And going one step back to the abattoir, for example, we have specific requirements for proteins around slaughter and deboning, which should include things or aspects of that, such as animal health and welfare, the GMP aspect of it, the HACCP aspect of it, the way in which we manage the processes and procedures specifically related to slaughter and deboning as well. So all of our manufacturers to our suppliers are also assessed for compliance against generally accepted requirements for McDonald's, and specifically for raw agricultural commodities as well as for protein. Now, when it comes to our direct suppliers, they're also requirements that we have for any supplier that supplies into the McDonald's system. And really, this is a condition of doing business with McDonald's. It's one of two conditions, by the way. The first is having a process in place, or having a audit against our supplier workplace accountability, which is, generally speaking, the way in which we manage insurance against sustainability efforts, the way in which we ensure that any supplier to McDonald's are working against principles that are accepted as, aligning with human rights principles and so forth. The second part is a requirement that we have against what we call our Supply Quality Management System requirements, or SQMS, I apologize. So all direct suppliers are required to either have this full SQMS audit or to have an equivalent GFSI plus addendum audit. In addition, we also require that our higher risk food production facilities, that they have an unannounced GMP audit. And these are facilities such as proteins. There are also agricultural products such as lettuce or tomatoes or onions that would fit into this category of requiring an unannounced GMP audit. You should be able to see many of the components of the GFSI audit in these requirements, including prerequisite programs such as our fundamental requirements module, as well as HACCP requirements, which are embedded in the food safety systems module. And then finally, the management system requirements you should be able to see also embedded within the food safety and quality management system, as well as the management responsibilities module. Moving one step ahead to our distribution chain, you can also see that there are very similar requirements in both ambient and cold chain management systems. Similarly, here you can see aspects of a foundational or prerequisite programs that are firmly established, the way in which risk is managed by understanding and controlling potential hazards, and then also a management system component which is responsible for bringing it all together. So what I've just described is really the first bubble that you saw in my my opening slides, which deals specifically with the way in which we deal with compliance against our food safety expectation documents along this food chain. While we recognize that that is important, we also recognize that audits are simply just a snapshot in time, but that there's a real value in ensuring that food safety is embedded within the organization. And we are saying that the real value of ensuring that food safety is the fact that it's directly proportional to having a robust food safety culture that promotes employee engagement while displaying clear leadership. So if we look at what we did as an organization, in 2019, we did a food safety culture assessment that included what we are terming our three-legged stool. It includes the franchisees, McDonald's Corporation, as well as a few of our suppliers. We selected the TSI BRC GS Camden model and surveyed senior managers, supervisors, and line workers to really understand the food safety culture strengths and opportunities within our system. As you can see from this slide, we surveyed 1,069 people in 16 countries from our franchisees, 806 people from 17 countries in the corporation, and 3,627 people from 13 countries and 32 production sites at a diverse selection of food group suppliers that we have. The results were interesting for us, showing that we had strengths, and what you see are the strengths in green. And those are strengths that we have in areas such as vision, values, strategy, external awareness, and risk foresight. And this is specifically related to food safety. However, what was more interesting were the opportunities that were identified, such as consistency, innovation, communication, investment in new food safety technologies, mitigation technologies, and then also training. And this allowed us to really focus on strategy in those areas that would be very meaningful for us to improve in food safety space. So our strategy now includes things like increasing leadership communication, and that's the talk that you see in the middle of your screen on the top. Also measuring the correct food safety measures that are aligned to business goals and objectives. Having a model that includes training, and for us training is focused a lot more now on visual learning such as e-learning as well as micro learning, being able to push a 30-second video or a video that is less than 2 minutes to a smartphone at a restaurant or within the corporation is a lot more meaningful when you have a lot of work that you have to do and you don't have time to sit and digest 40 minutes of online or classroom type learning. We also know that having a model that stimulates the use of new and novel food safety mitigations are important for us. So knowing and understanding how that's embedded within our strategy is important. And then the last part that I will mention is, we're now spending a lot more time on rewards and recognition programs that allow people who are doing the work to be recognized for excellent food safety behaviors. So here's an example of what our overall strategy looks like today. There's a lot more detail to this, but you can see very similar words to those identified in the opportunities in the previous slide. So after we did the food safety culture assessment, we obtained this valuable information about what we needed to focus in on to drive food safety culture improvement. And the improvement part is really what's important to us at this stage. The following 4 strategy focus areas is as a result of determining our biggest opportunities using that data assessment that I showed you on the previous slide. So firstly, we will ensure that we have a leadership team that is highly engaged in food safety. And this really means that our leadership, all the way from our CEO to the managers of the restaurants, need to really walk the talk. Secondly, we will increase the food safety visibility by having more focused food safety training and more purposeful food safety communication. We spoke a little bit about micro-learning, and that's all encompassed in that second bullet point that you see there. Thirdly, we will invest in new and novel ways to mitigate food safety hazards from farm to the counter of the restaurant. We recognize that there's a lot out there, and really what it takes from all of us is to be focused on new and novel ways to reduce risk in order for us to be successful. And then lastly, we will ensure that we strengthen our recognition programs to reward excellent food safety behaviors. And even though this is internally a strategic focus area for us, they're the same focus areas that we would also expect throughout our supply chain. Lastly, I would like to talk about focusing on emerging or impending risk. Now, this is perhaps the most important part of transforming an organization from one that is reactive to a proactive organization. It is recognized that especially with COVID-19, there were many aspects of our business that became vulnerable, even though COVID-19 is a public health issue and not a food safety issue. It certainly opened up our understanding of why it's important for us to really have what is called a finger on the pulse, or really, and I have this term that we have to have our ears on the train line to be able to know and understand what is coming. We may not recognize and know what is coming and how big it is, but we know that something is coming down the pipeline. So today, we are spending a lot more time on identification of impending food safety risks, which is done by continually scanning the horizon. The source of information includes academia, regulatory agencies, public health data, and feedback from internal and external stakeholders. Now, internal data, for example, could be from customer feedback or third-party audits. External data that we use, for example, would be from social listening or from feedback that we get from NGOs. The focus on impending risk can be, however, geographic in nature, as each population group or government may have a different priority. However, a typical scan would identify issues and risks, such as from a chemical perspective, things like pesticides and heavy metals, chemical migration from packaging to be significant risks. The biggest concern are those chemicals that are cytotoxic or neurotoxic in nature. Endocrine disruptors are now becoming more and more of an issue within the food industry. And then we also have allergens and sensitivities that could come about because of either cross-contact or because of exposure to materials within the supply chain. And then, of course, there are materials that are now beginning to come to the surface which are promoting inflammatory responses that the consumer is very much aware of. And you know, as I go through this presentation, I'll begin to talk later on also about consumer perception versus the science. Everything that we do is solely focused on the science, but certainly what we are learning from this exercise of understanding emerging risk is that sometimes consumer perception is heavily weighted versus the science takes a somewhat of a backseat. So certainly from a biological perspective, I can tell you, you know, from our scan, we see very typically viruses such as norovirus, hepatitis A, hepatitis E. So if you go to Europe, for example, hepatitis E tends to feature pretty prominently. From a pathogenic bacterial perspective, you typically find that Salmonella, ISTEC, Campylobacter, Listeria monocytogenes comes to the forefront, and then also emerging risks, especially in our produce supply chain, also focuses in on pathogenic protozoan parasites such as Cyclospora canadensis. So in addition to what you see, you know, there are also some concerns just by, you know, understanding what these data is telling us from different sources, that there are concerns about aspects of food such as zoonosis, the transfer of pathogenic organisms from animals to humans, and then also antimicrobial resistance in common bacteria such as multi-drug resistant gram-negative bacteria. Also from a physical perspective, just to bring it in the three aspects of food safety hazards, you know, these would include risks of equipment and packaging, as well as some of the unintended consequences. For example, PPE inclusion into food while we are mitigating the risk of COVID-19. You know, this is an unintended consequence of focusing in on perspex, facial masks, gloves to combat the onslaught of COVID-19. And certainly what we are finding is that an unintended consequence of that is somewhat of an increase of physical inclusion in food. So it's really important for suppliers to focus on HACCP as a mitigation step in order to ensure that when we have other crises, that we don't also introduce unintended consequences of related to food safety. And this really brings the point about a robust food safety culture into perspective, if you think about it, because those suppliers that have a robust and really focus on food safety culture are also the ones that are focusing on food safety in a multifaceted fashion. So big data can be pretty disorienting. So being able to visualize the information is really important. The great thing about modern digital technology is that it's pretty easy to create dashboards these days, such as heat maps and word clouds that are useful and helps to understand the impact, the complexity, the cost, and the degree of control that you will have on the organizational change that is needed. So making decisions based on risk priority is important, especially since it's really hard to boil the ocean, and really understanding what is important is where these type of mapping exercises and word clouds really help. So understanding the degree of urgency is also important to react quickly. Large organizations like McDonald's have often been compared to large ships, and it's really true, because being able to react with enough time and speed is important, but can take a long while to actually align an entire organization. Lastly, the importance of monitoring and verification of changes that are made. I cannot stress enough. While we spend a great deal of time assuring that the changes are meaningful and impactful, we also assess that by making these changes that we are not also introducing other unintended known or unknown issues as a result. For anybody who's familiar with the concept of wicked problems, this is exactly what it is. However, having said that, multi-stakeholder engagement is vital to ensure that you're not introducing or creating a different problem by fixing an existing food safety problem. So we tend to spend a lot of time socializing these changes that are made, as well as trying to verify the activities that or the changes that have already been made. So I'd like to stop here and spend a little bit of time talking about the danger of solely focusing on the science. Certainly one of the things that we have learned is that while most of our efforts are to ensure that we have mitigations and controls in place that are science-based and valid, we also recognize that public perception will occasionally trump the science. And this happens more than you think. The general public is not really interested in the details of the science. They're interested in science and making sure that we are safe from a scientific perspective, but certainly making the right decision and understanding their priorities is what's more important. So a good example of this is actually SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. While there's very little science to associate this virus with food, certainly the expectation moving forward around hygiene and cleanliness in food establishments has increased and will increase in the future to a large extent. So to conclude, I hope that you have found this presentation to be meaningful, that you have learned a little bit about how we associate our food safety efforts with brand protection, that while we spend a lot of money and effort focusing on new and novel interventions, it is a lot less expensive than the cost of rebuilding a brand that is valued at $160 billion. So the key takeaway messages for you today is, firstly, the science-based approach is really important to ensure that public health mitigations are maintained, but that it's not as always important because of public perception. Secondly, food safety culture is important to determine food safety integrity, because third-party audits, although valuable, are just a snapshot in time, but that the real value of ensuring that the right food safety decisions are made when nobody is looking is as a result of having a robust food safety culture. And then thirdly, a focus on emerging risk is going to be very important in the future. If we are wanting to make quick and meaningful changes in our food safety systems and to protect the public's health. And with that, I will hand it over to Amy for any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of that information, Gary. It's really interesting to get some insight into what goes on behind the scenes at McDonald's. I mean, it's such a large corporation with such a global presence that I honestly had no idea all of the things going on behind the scenes and how deep it went. So get those questions in, guys. Thank you, Gary, for all of the info. just really quick, I wanted to share with you all some of our upcoming webinars. They're all free to register, and you can find them listed at our website. That's pjrfsi.com. Up at the top, there is a drop-down. It's called training, and you will find the webinars link under that drop-down. And you can register for as many as you'd like. They're all free, and we would love to see you there. All right, so let's go ahead and see what kind of questions we've got. All right, we've got a question here, and I think this came in, Gary, before you went over the slide where you talked about surveying franchise partners and employees. This one is from Bill. Bill is asking, how can a business who's just starting to develop their food safety culture work on improving the culture?
Yeah, thank you, Bill, for that question. That's actually a really important question. We spent a lot of time, by the way, also trying to figure out the same thing, and it took us a while. So I'm very open to share our learnings. In order to build, you have to know where you are at. And certainly the reason that we chose to do these surveys using the TSI model was for that exact reason. We were able to do this complete scan, and basically how it works is it's an email with survey questions for anybody who's out there who has completed like a pulse survey or survey, an HR survey, where they scan an entire population for what the organization is doing right, what can they improve on. It's very similar to that. And there's a mathematical formula, by the way, for how many line workers versus supervisors versus senior leaders within the organization needs to be sampled. There are also a lot of firewalls in place in order to protect confidentiality of information. And what you get at the end is really this information that allows you in a very objective way to know and understand what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are or opportunities based on the survey. Now, there's value in number one, knowing that information, but the most valuable part of it is that from that point onwards, you can begin to build a strategy that allows you to focus on those areas of opportunity. And the point is that this is a never-ending situation where you continually do this over time and then continually improve using data.
All right, fantastic. And I'm sure trying to survey a smaller business that's just starting out might not take as much logistical effort as the entire McDonald's corporation, but it is a great way to start. Let's see, we've got a question here from Sarah. Sarah asks, how often do you review specs on ingredients?
That is a good question. So typically specs are established once a new product is developed. However, having said that, we are continually looking at variations in specifications. Typically, we will look. So if you look at the internal documents that we have, we are looking at knowing and understanding that there's not a drift away from our internal specifications within typically a 5-year cycle.
All right, great. Let's see. We've got a question here from Jason. Jason asks, with such a large geographical footprint, how do you keep track of compliance against all of the McDonald's requirements?
That is an excellent question, and it's with great difficulty, but it's not impossible. Any supplier that does business with McDonald's, a food supplier, as well as packaging supplier, by the way, is required to have a food safety audit. And as you heard from me very early on, it is a GFSI plus an addendum audit or full SQMS audit. And I'm speaking specifically now about a direct supplier, food supplier to McDonald's. And of course, there's also a GMP aspect to it. All of those findings and information is uploaded into a central repository. At McDonald's, we use a repository called RisePoint, which helps us to manage understanding if audits have been completed, but also helps us to understand what the largest non-conformance gaps are. We also, by the way, from a food safety perspective, manage all the corrective, or we expect our suppliers to manage food safety corrective actions and preventive actions, but we ask that we have visibility to those corrective actions via RightsPoint as well. That's really a condition of doing business with McDonald's. So we do scan and we do assessments on a yearly basis where we report up all compliance information to the board of directors. And that's a way in which we really drum it home from a market perspective. So every market has an organization that, and you can imagine a market is a country. And in those countries, they have resources to really know and understand what the gap is, if any, against those audit requirements.
Yeah, so challenging, but not impossible is a great way to look at it. All right, we've got a question here from Alicia. It's a two-part question. Alicia asks, how often are McDonald's audit, how often does McDonald's audit suppliers, and how often in the food industry should we be auditing our suppliers?
Okay, very important question. We audit our suppliers every year. We require all of our direct suppliers to be audited on a 12-month cycle. And all of that information is captured in RightsPoint, like I was saying. Our expectation is that our suppliers use the similar or the same type of methodology to not only manage their direct suppliers, but also brokers and traders, as well as any distribution centers that they may, or warehouses that they may have between the supplier base and the McDonald's distribution system. And we require that to be done also on a 12-month cycle.
All right, great. It looks like we have one more question sitting in the queue. If anyone else had any, points of clarification or other questions they'd like to ask Gary, please get those in the next minute or so. Let's see. This last question I have here is from Lucas. Lucas is asking, what kind of emerging risks might cause changes to your internal standards? Like, what are some examples?
Yeah. Okay. Very important. And I'll use a strange example, but it's a true example. So thank you for that, Lucas. Very often we have challenges within our industry. For example, chemicals that may migrate into the food. And a good example of that would be BPA, right? So a number of years ago when BPA was an issue that was identified through either regulatory concerns or from non-governmental agencies, those are the type of triggers that will allow us to make changes to our packaging material. Similarly, we are looking at things like nanoparticles, right, which are and here's the difference between Europe and North America, whereas in Europe and parts of Europe, there's legislation, for example, that are beginning to challenge nanoparticles and nanotechnology. The rest of the world has had more of a neutral stance. That's on our radar screen. So those are the type of challenges and risks that we identify. We look at it and we ask ourselves the question, what do we need to do today in order to anticipate a risk that may be very fast-paced in the near future? And so, for us, that meant, for example, that we removed certain particles. So, for example, titanium dioxide is what we took out of our foods.
All right, great. Thank you all so much for those great questions. If anyone had any questions that maybe they weren't comfortable asking on the call, maybe you're a little shy, or maybe you had a question that was a little more complex and wouldn't necessarily fit in the question box, you can go ahead and use the contact info on the screen here to submit any other questions you might have. If you send them over to us at PJRFSI, we'll be sure to get those over to the people who can answer them. So thank you again all for attending today's webinar. It looks like that's the last of the questions. Gary, thank you again so much for joining us and sharing all this spectacular information. Did you have any parting words of wisdom or advice for the audience before we wrap things up?
No, I think that what's important for us is that we do respect and thank every participant within the food industry, whether you are a supplier of food, whether you are an auditing firm, a CPO. It doesn't matter. You're playing a part to ensure that the public is safe. And I can tell you it's even more important now with COVID. Um, I think that certainly moving forward into the winter months in the Northern Hemisphere, it will be pretty challenging, like it was during the spring of this year. So I wanted to thank everybody on this call for, continuing to do an excellent job in, number one, in ensuring that the supply of food is appropriate, but also safe. And thank you, Amy and Paul.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a time for thanking everyone trying to keep us safe. So with that, I will wrap things up for today. Thank you to all of our attendees. Again, the slides will be available for download from PJRFSI.com, usually within 24 to 48 hours of the webinar completion. And the recording of the presentation with the voiceover will also be available within that time frame. So once again, from PJRFSI, we'd like to thank you for attending. We hope to see you on a future webinar. Stay safe and stay healthy out there. Thank you all.